Hi, thank you so much for joining me today. Today I want to share with you my story, share with you my journey with epilepsy. Hopefully some of it will resonate and some of it will maybe help you with yours. You know, I knew that this video in particular would be the hardest to film, and I cannot tell you how many times I have refilmed this video because I'm trying to find the right balance between being authentic and sharing some bits that might help, but also trying not to bore you to death. So hopefully I found the right balance. I have lived with epilepsy basically my entire life. I was first diagnosed when I was 3 years old, so I've really not known life without epilepsy. And in truth, the thing that I found the most difficult, it's not necessarily the seizures in themselves, which, let's be honest, they're a challenge all on their own, but what I've really struggled with is everything else that came with it, but I wasn't prepared for it. And when I say this, I mean, when you go to the neurologist, my experience with the neurologist is, have you had a seizure? Yes, no, yes, we'll increase your medication, no, well great, you're on a good medication. And that's basically as far as the conversation went. There was never a conversation about memory problems, the impact of epilepsy on your life, mood disorders that today I know are comorbid almost with epilepsy. And I look back and I think, if I'd have been more prepared, if I'd have known what came with epilepsy and some of the little quirks to the condition and some of the challenges that I'd have along the way, maybe I'd have been better prepared. I'd known to go and ask for help or what to ask for help about. Because when you're given a challenge in life, if you know what the problem is, then you've at least got a starting point to do something about it. But if you don't know, well, it's just a bit of a mess. So hopefully for me, sharing my story with you today, some of it might resonate, some of it might help you to maybe open a conversation with your neurologist and take an action plan about some of your challenges. So without further delay, let's go. So as I said, I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was 3 years old. And honestly, it didn't affect my childhood. I think at this period, if a young child's diagnosed with epilepsy, the person it affects most, I think, are the parents, because your job as a parent is to protect your child, to make them the happiest and healthiest they can be. And so when they're diagnosed with a condition that you as a parent can't do anything about, you can't protect them from that, I think that's got to be something quite challenging to go through. My parents decided they didn't make it a topic of conversation. So I had my childhood without really knowing about it. And I'm really grateful for them for that. They took the decision not to tell the family because they just wanted me to be Hannah without the epilepsy. And again, there's something that I'm really thankful for because I was just a kid. I do remember on the way back from one doctor's appointment with the neurologist at the time, just asking my parents, it's probably getting to the age where I was starting to ask more questions about things, and I asked them, why do I go there? And they quite directly said, well, you have epilepsy and we go there to make sure that you're on the right medication and that everything's going well, and you just have to have some checkups every now and then. Okay. But because they just answered it without any great explanation, I just took it in my stride, and that was the end of that conversation. The time that epilepsy really came into my life was when I was at high school, and my God, did it make an entrance, and it became a thing. I mean, two reasons really. Was I went through a change of medication, and also I'd reached my teens, and with all the hormones, it kind of kicked things off. And if I'm being honest with you, I can't really remember my teenage years as a big black hole at that time in my life. And I wonder why that is sometimes now. Is that because of trauma. You know, my brain's put that in a drawer somewhere and locked it up and just said, you know, you don't need to go there? Or is it because of the number of seizures I was having at that time in my life that there's a bit of damage there? I don't know. And actually I think it's a little bit of both, a bit of the two playing together. But what I do remember is it being a very challenging time in my life. One of the things, you know, when I talk about all the other stuff I wasn't prepared for, you know, I think the loneliness of having a condition, you know, when you're going through the thick of it and it feels like you are just constantly having seizures, you know, who do you have this conversation with? Who do you offload to? And I had a fantastic network. My parents were amazing, you know, but, you know, unless you're going through it, it doesn't matter how, you know, supportive you are of someone, you don't know what that's like, you know. They never really share it in the media, you know, whenever they portray epilepsy, first of all, it's always tonic-clonic, a drop-down seizure. There's apparently no other type of epilepsy. And people just recover like that after epilepsy, after a seizure. And that's not my memory. I remember being really, really ill, like so ill. And before I, you know, sort of go into this, I've actually experienced 3 types of seizures. So when I was 3, I was diagnosed with absences or petit mal. And when I reached my teens, I was re-diagnosed with complex partial seizures. And when I was around 17, I had my first tonic-clonic drop-down seizure. I've also had hallucinations, and I had this in my teens, and I didn't know at the time that this was a seizure. I didn't really tell anyone about it because we don't want to share that, do you? That you're hearing voices and you're seeing things that aren't there. But I later learned that this is a type of seizure. But in truth, the seizure that has been most prevalent in my life is the complex partial seizure. Now, we know that there are like 3 stages of a seizure, and whilst I don't want to spend too much time talking about the seizure in themselves, because I feel like we know enough about that, you know, we can read what a seizure feels like. What I want to talk about today is the impact it's had on my life. But we got to touch upon the seizure, you know. You can't have a video about epilepsy without some kind of conversation around the seizure in themselves. So we know that there are the 3 stages: the prodromal and aura, the beginning, the ictal, or the middle, or the big mama of the seizure, and the post-ictal, and that's, you know, the after effects, the end of the seizure. So prodromal, and not everybody experiences this. Essentially, it's you get the auras, and you kind of know a few hours before, sometimes even days before, that you're going to have a seizure. And this is something I used to experience. I would wake up in the morning and I would know that at some point during the day I was going to have a seizure. And I got so in tune with my epilepsy that I used to know whether it was going to happen afternoon time or evening time, based on how strong the sensations were. Aura-wise, you know, just before the seizure starts, I have this in my complex partial seizures. It is horrible. You feel terrified. I mean, you know what's coming. On the one hand, you've got this warning. So I used to go into a toilet and lock the door, or I would go and find somewhere really quickly and just put myself well away from a road or you know, any form of danger. But it would feel like I was being dragged out of my body, like, you know, being pulled out of my body. Everyone says, whenever I read about the aura, they say a burning smell. I can't describe it as a burning smell because I don't get a forest fire, you know. It's more of a sensation, and I think it's so distinctive that I find it very difficult to explain what that sensation is, or what that odor is. And I think the closest you can get to is burning. So the ictal, my seizure, I can't remember a huge amount what happens in the seizure, but I do remember feeling like suddenly I'm looking at these hands and they're not my hands, and I'm looking at this body, it's not my body, and the people around me, I don't know who they are, I don't know where I am, I don't know why I'm there, I don't recognise my parents, literally, I know no one, and I just remember a feeling of pure terror, like absolutely being terrified, and all I want to do is get out of there at that point. And so I've often, for onlookers have described it, that the colour just drains from my face, and I'm there, but I'm obviously not there, and I just walk. The post-ictal, after the seizure, you don't come round like that. It takes me hours to be Hannah again, to function again. And sometimes it would take me the entire day. I still wouldn't be quite there. And I just remember feeling like having this horrific migraine, like feeling like someone had just got a hammer and was like hitting my head over and over again. I couldn't see properly, it's very blurred, and hearing my ears hurt when people would talk to me. It was like a war, really painful, and I just would just be completely out of it, absolutely exhausted. Like it felt like every inch of me was absolutely exhausted, and I just wanted to sleep. And I would sleep for hours upon hours. And then you wake up and you're disorientated because, you don't wake up in the morning like you should. You wake up at like 5 o'clock in the evening, and you're still not quite with it. So it's intense. And again, I come back to that feeling of loneliness, because there's no one with you that is going through that can share that with you. So I think you build this, me, myself, and I think you become your own best friend, because you are the only person experiencing this in your world, and you're the only person who can get yourself through this. So this affected my schooling tremendously. Went into high school before all the seizures, quite a self-confident person. In the sense, I spoke to my mother before filming this, and she said, when you were a child and you were first diagnosed, obviously we were really, we wanted to wrap you up in cotton wool and protect you from everything, but to be with you was to give you confidence. Life bounced off you, and if someone said something to you that you didn't like, you just and you'd throw something back at them, and it was just to be with you, to give you confidence. And I said to my mum, I said, what the sad thing is, I can't say that that's the same person throughout high school, and it's probably only until today that I feel more like that myself, like that today. And she said, I know. And when I went into high school, as I say, I was this very self-confident person. I was in decent sets. I never really found school difficult. And then suddenly these seizures were happening. I was feeling really ill most days, very not being able to function, and complex partial seizures in the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe has the hippocampus that you need for memory, for learning. So obviously, to be having seizures on a regular basis in this part of your brain makes it really difficult to learn, and to obtain that information and to retain that information that you need to do well at school. And what felt like a mix between overnight my life changing, but also a slow death. I was slowly drop sets and taken out of my comfort zone, and I lost a lot of my friends. I went from being quite an extrovert to being quite introverted, quite self-contained, having a much smaller group of friends. And remember one day I was in mathematics and I looked down and I had a score of 14 out of 52. I remember looking at that thinking, what is happening? This isn't me. This isn't me. Who is this? What is going on? And it just was like that in all of my subjects. And I think it was the same day a teacher came into the room, stood me up in front of everybody, took me out and put me into one of the lowest sets. And it was so publicly done. I was also put into this, taken out of my tutor group, and I was put into this other group of people who weren't doing well at school, and suddenly I felt like I'd lost my identity, and that's something I really struggled with at high school. And when I was going through this, I'd lost my identity, and I felt like people had made a decision about me and my abilities. They'd not considered the fact that I was having, medical problems. Now, this failing at high school, I carried with me through my adult life. And I read this piece of research that was done in 2014 about the impact of epilepsy on children at school. And the results of it are profound. The impact on memory, the impact on information processing speed. Children who have epilepsy are likely to be impacted academically. It was. I will share the link to the report in below. And I didn't know this at the time, whilst I felt like I was misunderstood, at the same time I would tell myself, you're so stupid, you're such a failure. Maybe if you just worked harder, maybe if you listened, maybe if you did something, you wouldn't be in these sets. You have failed. And this just went on over time. At the same time, I was really struggling with my mental health. And again, I didn't know that it was mental health problems. I was just in a very dark place. We know today that mood disorders are almost comorbid with epilepsy, because so many people with epilepsy experience mood disorders. We talk about mood disorders, we talk about anxiety and depression. At this time as well, it was the early noughties, and we didn't really talk about it like we do today. Thank God we were much more open about it, but we didn't at this time. We didn't also have, when I was at high school, social media, or if we did, I definitely wasn't on it. So we weren't as aware of it, and we don't talk about it like we do today. So I didn't understand what was going on. Layering into that, I was having these hallucinations. Which I touched upon a little bit earlier, but I was a young person and I didn't want to tell people that I was hearing voices and I was seeing things that weren't there. It didn't make sense that they would be there. And I was sleeping with a nightlight because I was terrified of the dark and being on my own, and I was definitely too old for a nightlight. I would sleep with headphones in, a pillow, another pillow and a blanket, even in summer, which obviously wasn't very pleasant. And it was a terrifying experience. So again, if you can understand this loneliness that I talk about, all this stuff is going on top of what teenagers already have to deal with, with their identity, with their hormones and all these changes going on in their lives. You layer this in as well, and it was just a really, really difficult period of my life that definitely stayed with me for a long time, so much so that I think when my late 20s I was in therapy about it, because it stayed with me. So when I left high school, I had failed my exams. I left with 2.5 GCSEs, and I had to retake my mathematics and my English, and I remember getting my results and just bawling my eyes out. It was just like the day that I was an epileptic. you know, because I kept going to school. I didn't want to take a day off. I mean, if I took a day off because of my epilepsy, I wouldn't have gone to school. So I didn't want it to be my story and be who I was. So I just kept going to school. So when I got my results, I just felt like I was just the biggest failure. Thankfully for my support network, my family were amazing, and they, you know, straight away were like, right, this is what we're going to do, and we're so proud of you. And I cannot tell you how much that meant to me. Where I felt the biggest failure and the biggest letdown, to have my parents say to me, we're so proud of you, was, you know, so important. So I brushed myself off and I thought, right, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep going. Went to sixth form college, and by this point, you know, medication had sort of started to better control my seizures, and I was able to focus on other things than the seizures, and so on and so forth. So I retook my exams and I was doing quite well. I mean, you know, obviously it was difficult seeing my friends doing, you know, their A-levels and I was a year behind, but that's fine. I just, you know, just keep going. And then one day I was in, I can't remember what lesson, but one minute I was at a computer, the next minute I was on the floor. And I remember coming around thinking, well, this is new. I've never woken up on the floor before. And I'd had a tonic-clonic seizure, which obviously was not what you want, you know, to have it in front of a room full of your peers, but everyone was lovely and they really looked after me, and I just, you know, but it wasn't, obviously wasn't nice. And this, I think at this point I became a little bit obsessed with my diet as well. And I kind of look back as an adult and I think maybe, because what I felt was, Christ, at least before I knew what type of seizure I'm going to have, now I don't even know that, you know, this is less control. And I think maybe I transitioned that control to food, and I, you know, but that's for another day. So anyway, I brushed myself off. I'm not going to let this be my story. We just keep going forward. And I worked really hard at my exams, and I got a scholarship to go to university because I exceeded the qualifications required. And I remember the day getting my results to know that I would go to university, because I never pictured that before this point, that I would be going to university, you know. Was like, I just remember falling on the floor and crying, you know. Get a little bit choked up now talking about it. And went to university, and still at this point, one of the things that hadn't gone away was my struggles with mental health. I did start to have conversations with doctors, and I did get a diagnosis, but they didn't want to change my medication, they didn't want to put me on more medication, so it was all, we want you to go and speak to somebody. But I was going to university, I was, you know, freshers week, I don't want to be going to, you know, a therapist, you know, so I kind of put that in I didn't deal with it, which I should have, but I didn't. Went to university. University for me was a period where I was Hannah, and it was, I just became this person, just felt like the most authentic version of myself, and epilepsy was no longer this conversation, because, you know, for a number of years it had been, and it had been something that was so present in my life. But something I did notice and I did feel was like almost this loss, if that might sound weird, that suddenly what was once a huge part of my life was not so much a part of my life. So I had to kind of re-find myself actually, and work with that, and that was quite a journey in itself, but great, you know. And one of the things that I went through at university was struggling with my memory. I was really struggling with my memory, and it felt like one, you know, went in one ear and out the other, and I would revise and revise and revise, and I just really struggled to take it in and store it. At the same time, I found that when I would concentrate, a cloud, just a fog would come, and I just couldn't, it felt like I could like read a couple of words at one time, and every time I read a sentence or I read a couple of words, it would go, you know, and it was like a sieve, and it was really frustrating. So I thought, right, I can either just keep doing this or I can look into it. So I read something about a study of Mozart, and essentially, without going into the details about it, because I don't want to misquote it, but they did a study on a small group of people with epilepsy, and somehow it helped them deter from having a seizure. This was a massive turning point for me. So I put this music on, relaxing Mozart. I just always choose relaxing Mozart, and suddenly this cloud parted, and everything went from like a blur to crystal clear. And I just remember, my God, and I was like tapping away. It was like the credits to Murder, She Wrote, you know, she's like tapping away. And oh my God, I was getting my work done, I was studying, I was focusing, I felt like I could engage, and it worked, and it was perfect, you know. That was a massive turning point for me. But I was still struggling with revision, and it just felt like going one ear and out the other, and I really struggled with it. So again, I took to doing some research, and I found that, you know, if I note, and I do diagrams and I use different colours, somehow it helped me with my memory. And throughout high school, I had A2 sheets of paper all over my wall, even my ceiling. My room was very dark at one point because it's like no light. It was just A2 sheets of paper. And I would just walk around my room and I would just repeat and repeat and repeat what I read. And suddenly I was getting great scores on my exams. It was like my grades significantly improved. And I want to do a whole video on this because honestly, massive game changer for me, and I'll do another dedicated piece of video on this because it was a game changer. I did have a drop down seizure in my final year of university just before my big exams, and that was just because I was really tired. I wasn't looking after myself. I was just overstudying because I had this massive anxiety that I was going to fail. As I say, what happened at high school did not leave me. I had massive anxiety attacks whenever I had exams. They were tough. And then my final year of university, I woke up on my back and I had ulcers all over my tongue. And I was, first of all, thanked God that I was still alive because I could have swallowed my tongue, but woke up, I had blisters, ulcers all around my tongue. So painful. Anyone who has tonic-clonic seizures, my God, your mouth full of ulcers after, it is vile. And also, I remember I used to do this weird stuff after a seizure. I always felt like I had to do a task. I don't like milk. I don't like to drink milk. But for some reason, I decided at this point, I need to drink some milk. So I remember I rolled out of bed and I tried to walk to the kitchen. But I couldn't walk because I couldn't see properly. Everything was moving. So I then got on my knees and I tried to crawl to the kitchen. Just think of that clip from Wolf of Wall Street, you know, when he's sort of like army crawling across the floor. That was me. Anyway, I got halfway there and decided this is not going to happen. So I went back to bed and I slept it off. Do you do that? I don't know if anyone else has these weird urges to just pretend they've not had a seizure. I don't know. But anyway, from getting a better understanding of how I learn and how my brain works and how better to revise for me and not try and be like everybody else, I left university with a first class honours degree. And honestly, I was elated, you know, from someone who just kept failing, and I got a first class honours degree. Was honestly one of the happiest moments in my life because I felt like I had conquered it. I had come out the other side, and it was just an amazing feeling. And I then went to got a job, and I ended up in London, worked in London for like 10 years. Loved it. I think London, you know, particularly at this point, wasn't having the seizures. I felt like I was building Hannah, you know, outside of that world, outside of this fear of failure. I mean, it still stayed with me when it came to interviews. When I was in probationary period of jobs has always been a real a difficult period for me, because all this fear of failure comes back and plagues me. I've really had to work on that, and I'm in a much better place today through therapy, through working on myself. Where it definitely in the early years of my career, I had so many anxieties around not doing well at work, not passing probation, and so on and so forth. What I did have up until about 29 was I kept calling them my seizure feelings. And basically, I kept feeling like I was having the aura. And what it was like at one point, I feel like, oh, for goodness sake, just have the seizure so I can just get it over and done with. But I would just have these auras, and I'd feel like I was working with like half a brain. I couldn't hold conversations properly. It would happen almost every day. I would have a period where I would just, half of Hannah would go somewhere. And, you know, during presentations, it would be so embarrassing because I would just switch off halfway through doing a presentation. And of course, you know, not only do you not want people to blurt out that you have epilepsy, it's not something like, sorry lads, I'm just having a bit of epilepsy right now. Also, people don't know about complex partial seizures. Also, people don't know about auras. So do you want to go into detail about this? No, you don't. So you just muddle along. But then you're faced with the embarrassment and the stress of worried how you're coming across, and the fact that you can't find your words, and you can't find what you were just talking about, and you can't remember what you were doing right this moment. I got quite good at covering it up. I got kind of built that skill where it was getting less and less obvious, but it was really frustrating. And eventually around 29, I went to my neurologist where I was in, and we upped my dose. It was just a tweak of my medication, and it stopped. And I think this was fantastic, right? In a more recent conversation with a neurologist of mine, I actually found out that I was having seizures, and they were called simple seizures. So thankfully, I didn't do my driving lessons. Would have been terrible if I was in a car and had that. So that's another thing. Because of when I was 17, I kept, you know, having these sort of like intermittent seizures or having these problems. I couldn't get the sign off to do my driving license. So when you know, it's only today that I'm going through the process of doing this, because I'm completely seizure free, my medication is under control, so I'm taking my driving lessons soon. But look, I have had you know, obviously really difficult periods in my life with my epilepsy, but I will never let it be my story. And I actually think of my epilepsy as my dark gift. You know, I wouldn't ask for it for Christmas, but it has kicked my ass throughout life, but at the same time it has kicked me into never letting it be my story, never letting it be my identity. You know, you can struggle with your identity with this, particularly when any condition has such an impact on your life. But I have, you know, as I said, I've been to university, I have studied abroad, I have travelled, I have bungee jumped. I live in France today. I work for a company in Paris. And honestly, I think in many ways, I wonder if I would be the person I am today had I not gone through that experience. If you are going through this today, going through the fog of it, this isn't your story, this isn't who you are. And it can actually be something that makes you, it's something that some of your peers might not have. They don't have an obstacle that they have to get over. But with that, makes you in a position where There ain't nothing life can throw at you that you won't be able to deal with, because you've had to deal with this, and you've always had to come with a solution, and you've always had to fight and keep battling through. And for that, that's why I see it as a dark gift, because there ain't nothing that life can throw at you if you can't deal with this. And if you can deal with this, sorry, really ruined that last bit, didn't I? Anyway, thank you very much for listening to me blabber on today. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. I would be more than happy to help. And I hope in some way that this was of help, and if this was of any interest at all. But either way, thank you very much for joining, and see you soon.